Val Media Pinnacle Entertainment. More fire. Fuka fuka fuka. Bili bili me Bili bili me Obim na tomo to bili bili. Obim na tomo to bili bili. Ifunanya maka. Ifunanya maka. Bili bili no bimo. Ije lover to wemo.
Ndibe, you might as well just pick up and continue
from there.
Deo.
And I know.
Yes, I know.
I know.
So my name is Okey Ndibe. I'm from Amuabia in Oka South local government area of Anambra State. I am a writer. I was a columnist with Obiwakama. I actually preceded him as a columnist, but I retired from writing a regular column in 2017. I wrote a column in the Guardian newspaper in Nigeria, for the Sun newspaper, and the columns were widely circulated. Can you hear me well, by the way? Am I loud enough?
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Oh,
and Igwe, please mute the audience if you may.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. I've been busy doing that as we speak.
Good. So I'm a novelist as well. I have 2 novels. I have a memoir and just finished working on another novel. I've been a visiting professor at different universities, including Brown University, where I co-taught with the great Nigerian writer, Chinua Achebe. Chinua Achebe actually invited me to America to be the founding editor of a magazine that he and Professor Bat Nnaji co-founded in 1988. So that's when I came to this country, December of 1988. And so I've taught, as I said, at different universities and colleges in this country, and also in Nigeria, the University of Lagos, as a Fulbright professor. Obiwakama is a dear friend, and he and I were supposed to have a conversation. He called me about a week ago, but it's been crazy in these COVID times when you're supposed to have a lot of time, but actually you don't have much time. So we didn't talk about what he was going to get into and what I was going to get into. So he's covered a lot of the grounds that I was going to get into. So I'm going to sort of skirt around some of the subject. I wanted to speak particularly about what I call the cultural crisis among our people. I'm still going to talk about it, but Obi spoke about it and called it aptly the crisis of identity. I wanted to sort of segue into this talk by referencing his Amadi trope. And I'm going to bring it closer to our recent history by going again to Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, where we encounter where we encounter Okonkwo. And I think that the most damning thing that Achebe says about Okonkwo is that Okonkwo was a man of action, not a man of thought. So that's important for our people to understand, because I think there's a particular impatience amongst our people with talking, with ideas. And so people tell you, the time for talking is past, we need time for action. But Achebe instructs us through the example of Okonkwo, who commits a number of precipitate actions that ultimately lead to both his personal doom as well as the tragedy of his larger community. Instructs us that when we act without proper thinking through of what our action means and indeed how to act, that certain doom awaits us. So that's very important. I also would like to talk about what I call the Biafran ghost that haunts Nigeria. And I've said in several columns as well as several fora that Nigeria's maldevelopment, Nigeria's crisis of development is rooted in Nigeria's refusal to come to terms with what Biafra meant. So Biafra is a straight contradiction for Nigeria. Here is a country where a section of its community felt justifiably justifiably treated abominably. And this community said, we want out. We want to form our own separate community. The rest of Nigeria said, no, it's not going to happen. A 30-month war ensued in which anything from 2 to perhaps more than 3 million people perished. At the end of which we said, there is no victor and no vanquished. And as Nigeria is making this proclamation, is declaring that the property that the Biafrans had left in parts of Nigeria, other than their own areas of origination, that property was considered abandoned. Okay, so you say you must come back to Nigeria, but as you come back, we're going to declare that your property is abandoned, so it's not going to come back to you. They then decided that regardless of the level of resources that you had before the war, you were going to get only 20 pounds. So if you were a millionaire, you were reduced to 20 pounds. Then over the decades since the end of the war, the Nigerian government has pursued a policy of absolute denudation of the southeastern part of the country, the part of the country that coincided with Biafra, so that there are no meaningful federal projects in the southeast, and certainly no serious military installations in the southeast. And in a country where the Igbo are clearly, if you look at the statistics for kids who go get into JAM, where the Igbo account for most of the demographics for higher education in Nigeria, you find that if you pick up any newspaper on any given day and you look at appointments, and this is not just under Buhari's regime, which has been particularly atrocious on this question, but indeed before, you'll find frequently that there is an absence of Igbo names and of names from the broader southeastern Nigeria. So Nigeria invested the lives of 3 million people in an argument that insists that to keep Nigeria one is a tax that must be done, which was one of the which was the central lingo, really, of the Gowan government during the war, that to keep Nigeria one is a tax that must be done. To which Wole Soyinka responded that to keep Nigeria one, justice must be done. So at the end of that war, a war that was precipitated by injustice, fought on a particularly callous basis with the starvation. Remember that of the 3 million people who died, most of them were civilians, and most of them were women and children. So these were not soldiers who died. So this was a callous policy that decimated innocent people. And then at the end of it, Nigeria presumes itself to be one country, but has since then, and before then actually, pursued a policy where it was clear that we were not one country. It was clear that the Igbo are told every day to prove their good faith, when this question should not arise, because as Obi said rightly, that the Igbo's investment in Nigeria, our spiritual investment, our moral and financial investment in Nigeria should not be up for question. It is clear. It is so axiomatic that people say if you go to any part of Nigeria, indeed any part of the world, and you don't find an Igbo person, perhaps you should run quickly because it's not a particularly habitable place. So we find, therefore, Nigeria staging a policy that I call, that has created a contradiction. And it is because of the Nigerian contradiction, it is because of Nigeria's failure, refusal to deal with Biafra, the question of Biafra, and to deal with it in a very just and honest way. That's what gave rise to Odi massacre, the massacre of the Odi people. That's what gave rise to the struggle of the Niger Delta people for what they call resource control. Incidentally, of course, during Biafra, some of them were ambivalent in the Niger Delta. Some of them were ambivalent about Biafra in the Middle Belt. But since they have come to find out that the same ideas that the Igbo saw in the 1960s, that same pathology is playing itself out in Nigeria today, which is why you find all these agitations from different parts of the country, from the Yoruba, from the Niger Delta, from the Middle Belt, this quest for self-determination. So the same way that the Odi massacre happened was what happened in Zango-Kataf, okay? And these things could happen precisely because the tragedy that was the Biafran slaughter, the Biafran genocide, was not addressed by Nigeria in any way. So the questions that we have to ask in Nigeria is, what is the cost of that war that we fought? What is the real cost? What does it mean that 3 million people perished in pursuit of an idea, the idea of one Nigeria, at a time when the people who were pushing this idea did not believe in the idea of one Nigeria and still do not believe in the idea of one Nigeria today, okay? So why was it that we fought this war? Why was it that Nigeria tried and that the rest of the world, actually the superpowers in the world, stood solidly behind Nigeria to ensure that Nigeria remained one corporate entity? But there is a hollowness, an essential hollowness. I remember during one of my first interviews with Chinua Achebe as a young journalist, that Achebe said to me that Nigeria as a nation has not been founded. Nigeria as a nation has not been founded, he said. And I think that what Achebe said to me in the early 80s is actually more true today. So that instead of a progression toward a dynamic formation of a Nigerian state, that what we're doing is to move in the other direction, that Nigeria witnesses rapid and dramatic denudation of a national will and spirit, rather than a strengthening and vitalization of such a spirit. Wole Soyinka in the 1990s gave a lecture at Harvard University where he said that this space, referring to the space of Nigeria, has no nation in it. So Nigeria is an artificial space, which is something that I was said, you know, that Nigeria is an artificial expression. Nigeria is an artificial space that has no nation, no national spirit inhabiting it. So for me, the question becomes, what do we do with this? Since we're talking about Igbo solidarity movement, and since the object, the central object of the group is to honor the dead from our war, I think that it is important to underscore that we have not told the story of the war. A few years ago, I happened to be close to a Nigerian governor in one of the southeastern states. And I said to him that we needed to get an oral history of the men who fought in Biafra, that if they were in certain societies, that they would write their histories. And I said that such histories were important. So I said, could you make funds available to a department of history, whose students would then make it a project to farm out into the different nooks and crannies of the Southeast, as well as other parts of Nigeria, to identify these men who did heroic things, who held up Biafra, held up Nigeria with their bare hands sometimes, could we tell their stories and record those stories in digital form? I'm ashamed to say that this governor did not understand the import of what I was saying. So we have not done our duties by our dead people, those people who sacrifice themselves. Some of them, in fact, a cousin of mine went to Gabon and told me that there are still lots of young people who were flown out to Gabon during the war, who lost all contacts with their families. And so in a lot of ways, they became, they're lost, is what it is. So we haven't even tried to say, who are these people, our sons and daughters, who were taken out outside of Biafra during the war? How can we, through such technology as DNA and so on, how can we bring them back and find where the families that they belong to? Because of course, we also know that there are families that are looking for their lost ones, you know, but we haven't made all those gestures to reconnect with our history. And for me, that's something really sad. But to talk about cultural crisis, I go back to Nigeria and I go to Enugu. And there are Igbo sons and daughters born in Enugu or born in Onitsha who do not speak Igbo language. Okay? And I met a woman with her children. And I said to the children, Kekunume. And their mother said to me, they know they hear Igbo. And I said, you and your husband are Igbo, you live in Igbo land, and your children do not understand Igbo. And she was saying it proudly. And you can see that perhaps during the Christmas holidays, she would take her children back to the village to go and show village kids that my children don't speak Igbo, they speak English. So I said to her, but what do your children speak? She said, then they speak English. I said, no, they don't speak English. They were speaking Pidgin. But that's the tragedy. The crisis of identity that my brother, Obi Wakama, talked about. It is so deep, this crisis, that we must begin to address it, and to address it from different prongs, not just from different directions. I have become, some years ago, I was teaching at a college, and they said, is there some fun class you would like to teach? And I knew the magic, the enchantment of listening to the beautiful folk tales that my parents and uncles and aunts told us when we were growing up. So I said, I'd like to teach a course in African folk tales. And it became a record-breaking course because there was such a long waiting list of students who wanted to get into my class. There wasn't enough room to bring in the students. But what shocked me was that I went home to Nigeria and I said to my mother, I said, Mama, Lotem, remind me of these stories that you used to tell us, folk tales. And she said, my son, I've forgotten them. Then she sent me to an elderly woman. She said she will remember. I went to that woman. She said, I've forgotten. Then the woman sent me to somebody else. Everybody had forgotten the stories they told us. And part of it is that everybody was watching television, watching toxic stuff on television. And they forgot. And so luckily for me, I was so enchanted that I knew some of those stories and I was able to run the class. But our children no longer know these stories. And these stories are repositories of a particular kind of wisdom, the wisdom fashioned by our ancestors. Well, I didn't want to speak at length because, it's a conversation and I know that a lot of people are waiting to get in. But I just want to touch on two other points quickly. One is that as Obi, and I think I understood what Obi was talking about, the idea of Biafra. So the going lingo is, of course, that Nigeria is a zoo. And my response has always been, yes, it's without question. Nigeria is a zoo. Nigeria is a failed state. There's no question about it. But I also remind people that all of us, including Igbo leaders, have contributed in creating that zoo. And I also remind people that there are many people in all parts of Nigeria who want to unzoo themselves. Okay? So the question I always pose is, are there ways for us to strike interregional collaboration, to collaborate with the elements in other parts of the country of Nigeria who want a different kind of Nigeria? During the last election, I happened to be home in Nigeria just before the elections to bury my mother. And then I used the opportunity to start talking to everybody who came to me. I said, who are you going to vote for? Some people will say Buhari, and some will say to me, Atiku. I said to them, how about Kingsley Moghalu? And they'll say, he doesn't have what it takes. I said, what does it take? He doesn't have the structures, they will tell me. So I'll tell them, I said, listen, become his structure. I said, we all send all these useless videos to hundreds of people on WhatsApp. I said, why don't you write a statement to 10 of your friends and you tell them, I'm pledging to vote for Kingsley Moghalu because he's the best candidate, not because he's Igbo, but because he's the best candidate. And you say to them, I don't want you to make excuses. Just you, each of you receiving this message, make a commitment to vote for him and then send the same message to 10 of your friends and tell them to do the same thing. We had an election where Buhari is assigned, because there was no election really, they assigned numbers. Buhari is assigned 13 or so million votes. Atiku is assigned maybe 11 million votes. And Kingsley Moghalu is assigned 200 or so thousand votes. That tells you the story of our country. It tells you part of the story of this space that we call Nigeria. But, so let's talk about regional integration. Nigeria is not invested in the Southeast. It's not invested. In fact, Nigeria is still at war, if you like, with the Southeast. But because Nigeria is at war with the Southeast, Nigeria is at war with itself. Because until Nigeria learns, until Nigeria unleashes, until Nigeria unshackles, if you like, the Southeast, Nigeria is going to remain the mess, the tragedy, the quote-unquote zoo that it is. But then we must ask ourselves, how have our own people, our own governors fared? Has anybody stopped the Southeastern governors from coming together, from cooperating, from aligning to work on a common communications grid, to work on transportation grids, to work on the power sector needs of the Southeast and so on? I don't think anybody has stopped them. And I'm going to close quickly. Again, let me return to culture. Last year, I happened to be in Nigeria and I met again with a governor of the Southeast. I won't name them because the stories are not flattering. And I said to him, I said that there are 2 or 3 major literary festivals that happen in the Southwest. There's a major one that happens in Kaduna. I said, how about you start a literary festival in the Southeast, involve the Southeastern governors, your colleagues, perhaps rotate this, and if the cost of it will be prohibitive for your state. So rotate the literary festivals, bring in writers, begin to institute again in the minds of our young people that education is important. I'm sure that all of you have seen a video where there's a child who mocks the idea of going to school and who talks about no boutique, and our people say na akunesio bike, and to some extent that is true. But really where it matters, or amamife, Bill Gates is important in the world, not because of the billions that he has, but because of the idea that he came out with that has revolutionized the world. Zuckerberg is important, not because he has billions, but because he created a new way that people communicate in the world, and so on and so forth. So we must focus not on money, but on ideas. Dalon.
Okay. Ndewo, Professor Ndibe. Please, can Kora Nyaka? Ndewo. That was a very good presentation. Before we go to the interactive session, the question and answer session, I would like to point out, if you need to ask a question, you can go on the chat and just indicate that you are interested in asking a question or making a comment. And we have to make it brief because of time. But before we get to that section, Odurumanya that Omurofodu Nimai Ndiluro Ogu Biafra. Some of us are still, some of the Biafran heroes are still alive, and I believe some of them might be here on this conference call. And it is important that we acknowledge them if we can. I think I would like to, I don't know if Charley Chikezie is available. If you can handle this part for us, I'll appreciate that. There, Charley.
Yeah, thank you, Nkem. Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
yeah.
Please, if you can handle this part for us, I'll appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate you. And Biko Umunnem no Munnam, I thank you very much for honoring our invitation. There are quite a lot of things going on today. As Nkem said, this Igbo Remembrance Day / Biafran Memorial is something we've been doing since 2017. And when I invited my two personal friends, Okey Ndibe and Obiwakama, usually when I invite Obi to an event, you know, he tells me that he has no option but to comply, because if not, I will give him runs. And what he means by that is in Government College of Moya, we say obey before complain. so I get to enjoy that privilege, and I see that at a lot of my Mayan brothers here, including class of 72, I mean class of 65 as a matter of fact, and a whole bunch of other people. I know that, as Nkem correctly pointed out, my boss, when he was the chairman of World Igbo Congress, I was his secretary general for 2 terms. Chibuzon Uchekwa is on the line. And of course, if it ever gets a veteran as he gets in terms of the Biafran War, Chibuzon Uchekwa is as good as he gets, including also Chief Austin Igwe, also the second and the former chairman of World Igbo Congress.
Is Igwe here?
I don't know if he dialed in. I know he's in Nigeria. He was grappling with technical challenges.
Yes.
But I don't. I checked when I checked the waiting room. I didn't really see his number. So Biko, what I will do at this point, and I will along the lines of honoring our Biafran veterans. Biko, Nkem, did you? Everybody's still on mute.
Oh yeah.
Okay, because unmute Ichi Onwuchekwa if you could. Let me see.
C, yes. Is it C Onwuche?
Yes.
Vow Media Pinnacle Entertainment. More fire. Fuka fuka. Billy Billy me. Billy Billy me.